Good evening, everyone, and welcome to DIA. My name is Matilde Guidelli. I'm a curator here and the organizer of the Artist on Artist lecture series, where since 2001, we invite an artist to reflect upon the work of another artist in DIA's collection and past program. And I am very pleased to introduce tonight's talk featuring Simon Leung on Tehching Hsieh. A few thanks are due before diving in to those who helped make tonight possible. Kim Golding, Max Tannon, Ella Denelzen, and the visitor service team for the production support, and as well as Umberto Moro, Liv Coniberti, Dan Wolf, for sharing their expertise and making Tehching's work available to Simon for the lecture. And most especially, our thanks are due to Tehching. I don't know where he is, but he's here. Oh, hi. For entrusting DIA with your work. A few years ago, the curatorial team received an email from Jessica Morgan that Tehching Hsieh was looking to partner with an institution to present his one-year performances and eventually steward the work in perpetuity, and urging us to find the time to go to Brooklyn, meet Tehching, and see the work. And we could not believe that the staff of Legend was in Brooklyn, but we went. And I still remember entering as a team in your studio, and in particular seeing the cage where you lived for a year with still the seals that Robert Projansky put, and a whole trove of objects, photographs, punch cards, pieces of clothing that are now expertly installed in Beacon by Adrian, Umberto, and Liv, and that truly defy categories and time and space coordinates. Simon Leung learned about Tehching's work as a young person at the library through arts magazines, and ever since went on to produce a multimedia body of work that takes space and body postures such as surfing and squatting to make work such as the 1998 piece, Surf Vietnam, that we had the pleasure to present here at DIA a few years back, on which occasion Simon and I met. And Simon not only has been knowing about Tehching's work since he was a young person, but he's also been waiting for an opportunity to talk about it since. And so, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Simon Leung on Tehching Hsieh.
Thank you. Well, first I want to say that it's such an honor to be here, and I too want to thank some folks. First from Matilda for your interest in talking to me the last few years. And I want to thank Ella Denelzen, Liv Coniberti for providing me with all the information that I need and more. Kim Golding, Max Tanone, and all the team at DIA. I want to thank Lincoln Tobier for being my sounding board. All things art or life related. I want to thank Adrian Heathfield. Even though he's not here, he was extremely nice and encouraging with a note. And of course, most of all, I want to thank Tehching Hsieh for his example and his work, and you're very, very important to us. I am somebody who used to work at DIA, like I think maybe, I don't know, a fifth of you in this room. I was a guard at DIA in the early 90s, and it's very gratifying to see folks that I worked with here in the in the bookstore. It was a really good job at one point when you were a guard at DIA. You made less than $10 an hour, but nobody came. So you could literally read a book a day. And I just want to mention that in the spirit of Tehching Hsieh. I also want to say, Matilda mentioned that I've been thinking about Tehching's work for a very long time. It's true. I remember I was one of these kids who lived at the library, and I was 14 or 15 when I used to read the Village Voice and art magazines and Art Forum, and I remember coming upon his work, and also where I grew up near San Francisco, there was an alternative, I don't know if it's cable access, television called Video West. And you get all kinds of radical culture, queer culture, and art stuff. So that's where I learned about Chris Burton and the Kipper Kids and a lot of stuff that were very important to me. But learning about Tehching Hsieh's work at a young age meant a huge amount for somebody who grew up completely. Since I was 10, grew up in the suburbs where there were very few people of color at all, and just to see that perseverance and that fortitude attached to that body and that face was extremely important. Okay, so the talk that I'm going to give is divided into roughly, you can either say 4 parts or 6 parts. 4 parts are written, maybe a little bit overwritten, and 2 parts are sort of freestyle. What I want to do, though, is to just go through Tehching's work. I'm sure most of you in this room know the work well, but glasses. But I just want to go through the works just as a refresher. So this was the first year-long project that lasted from 1978 to 79. It's quite self-explanatory statement. I, Sam Hsieh, plan to do a 1-year performance piece to begin on September 30th, 1978. I shall seal myself in my studio in solitary confinement inside a cell room measuring 11 feet 6 inches by 9 feet by 8 feet. I shall not converse, read, write, listen to the radio, or watch television until I unseal myself on September 29th, 1979. I shall have food every day. My friend Chiang Wai-Kwong will facilitate this piece by taking charge of my food, clothing, and refuse. Sam Hsieh, and the address, 111 Hudson Street. I won't read the whole thing for everything, but I just want to get the rhythm of Tehching's work, which I feel is in its aesthetic of illustration also actually quite poetic. This is the time clock piece where he punched in every hour on the hour for a year. So he couldn't really be anywhere else for more than, I guess, 59 minutes at a time. He did miss a few. He was early for a few and overslept for a few, but all in all, pretty good record. This is the next year-long piece, lasting from 1971 to 1972, where he resolved to stay outside for the year. I want you to notice that On the left, it says one-year performance by Sam Hsieh, and on the right, it says Tehching Hsieh. I think that's quite interesting. I'll talk about the name in my talk. This is the work, the rope piece, where he was tied to Linda Montano with an 8-foot-long rope for the entire year, and they never touched one another. This is a fascinating piece. This took place in 1985-86. Tehching Hsieh planned to do a year performance. I blank, not do art, not talk art, not see art, not read art, not go to art gallery and art museum for 1 year. I just go in life. The performance began July 1st, 1985 and continue for a year. This on the left is the printed material for the beginning of a 13-year piece where Tehching says he will make art during this time, but he will not show it publicly. The plan will begin on my 36th birthday, December 31st, 1986, and lasts until December 31st, 1999. And on December 31st, 1999, this was unveiled. I watched the video of its unveiling at Judson Church, where Martha Wilson opened this book and read aloud, "I kept myself alive. I passed the December 31st, 1999. Okay. I'm going to read a passage quoting Tehching Hsieh from an interview that he conducted with Lisa Chen and Eugene Lim in The Believer in 2019. I've been here since July 13, 1974. It was tough because I was an illegal immigrant. I jumped ship. I was illegal until I was granted amnesty. At that time, I lived on 180th Street in Washington Heights. In the beginning, I was afraid of the police because I was illegal. But when I was looking for a job, I had to take the subway. And I found some people who I could tell were illegal and asked them where I could find a job. I was a dishwasher. I cleaned restaurants. You cannot wash dishes for more than a month or your hands will be gone. They get damaged by dish detergent. Restaurants are busy, crazy. I work 13 hours a day, maybe got paid $1.50 an hour. I did this for 4 years. It took me 2 years to find Soho. I knew the World's Art Center was in New York, but I didn't know exactly where. One day, by accident, I found Soho. I tried to go back. I tried to remember one building. 2 years after I found Soho, I found some Taiwanese artists. I recognized one of them in the street and got to know the Taiwanese art community here. One of the artists owned a Chinese restaurant in Soho. For 2 years, I worked in that restaurant, moving 100 chairs on the table every night, then cleaning and waxing the floor. By then, I was living in a loft in Tribeca, not making art, just thinking. I hadn't made art in 4 years. I had to work at the job, and I had to get over culture shock. I was 28 when I did my first one-year performance. So for 4 years, I really felt strongly that I was wasting time. This, as I understand, is from a video or film that Tehching had made. So it's a screen grab, as I understand it. What is the time of this work of art? Is it a year? The year that we know the film will document, April 11, 1980, until the same day on 1981. Is it the roughly 6.5 minutes that it will take to watch this film? Or is it the accumulation of 8,627 split-second frames of film that will vibrate before the viewer, each film its own moment? Is it the time of stoppage that only gives the illusion of the passage of time, because like all films, each frame is stitched onto the next? Is it the time of anxiety, flashing your inability to grasp or hold onto any moment, and then anticipating and yet losing right away the next? Or is this the time of the future the artist anticipated? You and me here, with our shared gaze upon the film, producing a reception that will justify his year of interrupted sleep. Does the vision of the viewer ratify the work of art? If so, is the time of your seeing the time of the work? Or is the time of the work the moment of its making, its coming into being? And what of the meticulous preparation that the artist took to set up an apparatus that would facilitate each moment of recording? Where does that time go? 1980 turning into 1981. If you remember that year, those years, do you fall into them nostalgically? Or if you came after those years, do you know them as myth or history? Do you not measure that time against our own here, now, your time and mine? That is, if you assume one can know one's own time. Or is the time of the work the 45 years that has since lapsed, the distance between then and now? What is the time of this work of art? Time is written on the man's face, fighting the tyranny of a clock that has called upon him to hold a pose that they can both be documented by the camera. Time is performed by the clock, its hands spinning relentlessly as if they were at once whipping the man next to it into obedience, yet indifferent to him showing up. The man is tethered to the clock out of a duty to perform his task. The clock is just a thing, a dumb thing that does not know anything, not even itself. And yet the clock rules the man and places him under its dominion. Do we see time split in two? On the left, time is cyclical, recursive, inhabiting a shape with no beginning or end, a law unto itself, while on the right is a person whose growing hair literally indexing the linearity of the year. And yet, do we not also see time registered on a third index, the proof of where the body meets the machine, in the form of the rising registration of ink on the time cards over the man's shoulders? Are these signs of repetition, dialing into the future, here to picture a drive? If so, does the man who must show up again and again do so to sync up with the drive, and therefore reconcile all three as one machine, one register of time. The feeling of time for the artist living this work is only inferred, cannot be known or experienced by the viewer, we who are seeing. So perhaps what you see is not the time of art at all, but only its alibi. The film picturing the artist whose hair grows long before you, looking every bit like someone who had weathered a year of sleep deprivation, holds the work together like a membrane of a thing. The thing is the work of art, but because the work is comprised of the accumulation of time, all we can see is the representation of measurement and the logic of measurement's need to cross-reference between the quantifiable and the incalculable. The clock, the time card, the worker, elements which through mutual interpolation justify the naturalization of the violence of wage labor, and hourly wage labor in particular. Here it is reinterpolated as an excess of selves that appear as functions of time under capitalism. The time clock, industrial capital's control mechanism of the workers' exchange of labor power for a wage, is here called upon to form its true function, to command, regulate, and rationalize the way human beings live their bodies in service of somebody else's profit. A time card recording the hourly registration of the worker should allow for the worker to cash in for a wage, but here it gains him no monetary compensation. During the whole of this year, the worker, the artist, never stops punching in, never stops facing the camera. Even though there is no service to perform, nothing to assemble, no money to make. There is only showing up every hour on the hour to enact the picture of subjugation under capital, wrapped in a libidinal skin. What you see is what you see. When I look at the two uniforms Tehching wore for the first two of his year-long projects, I think of an anecdote I thought I had read somewhere. But on the train to New York, back from Beacon, Anthony McCall, who was a neighbor of Tehching's when he was at 111 Hudson Street, confirmed that it was he who told me the story. It goes something like this. At a gallery opening in the late 70s or early 80s, presumably in Soho, a friend of Anthony's asked him, "How can you tell the artists from the dealers?" "It's simple," he replied. "The dealers are wearing jeans, and the artists would be in suits." The time clock piece, taking place in 1980 and 1981, would fall into this slot of time as this observation on the changing atmosphere of the New York art world as it entered the 80s. In contrast to some of the contemporary artists in the commercial art world Anthony described, Tehching's sartorial decision pictures a janitor or maintenance worker cleaving closer to the elective affinity of artists a decade prior, closer perhaps to a more proletarian aesthetic in the time of anti-war protests and civil rights, a time when artists recast themselves as art workers, when political convictions also turned inward to structure interrogations of art institutions. For the first year-long piece, the cage piece, the artist announces himself as Sam Hsieh. He's more often than not in a uniform designed to mimic a prisoner's garb, with text that is boldly stenciled directly onto a white shirt. In the headshots taken daily to archive his confinement, this is always the case. Tehching Hsieh taking on the name Sam was meant as a strategic ruse to throw off the scent of his illegal status in this country. The idea is that Sam Hsieh is becoming the artist who is gaining recognition in downtown Manhattan for making singularly demanding art. Sam Hsieh is to be separated from Tehching Hsieh, the quote, illegal alien who jumped ship to make his way to the city a few years before. To adopt a new name but keep one's own actual last name is a strange way to concoct deception. But if the logic holds, Sam should be the one who confronts the world, while the name Tehching would be divulged only to intimate friends and not to people in the art world. But what if Sam Hsieh is separable from himself, like a secret waiting to be told? When you look at the photographs of Hsieh facing the camera, reading from left to right, Sam, the name he took to hide, would sit atop 93078, the date of his self-incarceration, and Hsieh, the actual surname that he keeps to secure his place as an artist, would be above 92979, the end date of his release on the other side of his chest. This odd spacing traces something, but what? To read the name as a singular entity, one must cross a gap. The two parts of the name, one fictive and the other factual, are split up. The number is not his identity, but his year-long sentence. A lateral scan across his body produces an interesting syntax, a pause, which implies that Sam will begin the work, and Hsieh will complete it, with the blankness between the two names functioning like a visual stutter, slowing down, saying Sam and Hsieh together seamlessly as one. The visual signifier would continue to fragment. Hsieh has said that until the middle of the third year-long piece, he was perpetually afraid of getting caught and deported. But by the middle of the outdoor piece, something interesting happens. Sam becomes a dead name, and Hsieh reverts to his true given name, Tehching. So I'm showing this because this is the same work, but you see the first two posters says Sam, and the second two says Tehching. Although not shown until 4 years later, that is, not until he was making the outdoor piece, Tehching Hsieh in fact made another work as Sam, while at the same time there was no pretense of being Sam. Tehching Hsieh, wanted by U.S. Immigration Service 1978, described as, quote, a wanted poster, was included in Illegal America, the first exhibition organized by Jeanette Ingerman and Papo Colo under the name Exit Art at Franklin Furnace in 1982. His name on the poster is Tehching. The slight discrepancy between the spelling of the 1978 poster, where Te and Xing are separated by a dash, and the material for the outdoor project 3 years later, gives credence to the fact that the poster was made a few years prior in 1978. But contra the information on the poster, the artist of the statement, like in the checklist for the show, is Sam. One can argue that because Tehching Hsieh, wanted by US Immigration Service, was only shown inside an art gallery context, where by the early 1980s, artifice, irony, and the grammar of allegory of the picture's generation had begun to saturate the contingencies of representation. Nonetheless, it's clear to me that there was also a Nietzschean impulse of transvaluation in Tehching Hsieh, wanted by US Immigration Service, 1978, as if to say, "What are your wounds to me? Let them fester in the sun. I am strong enough for that." Is this what Tehching Hsieh means when he says he is a sincere criminal? Sincere enough so that by May, when he was arrested, he used his own name. If I see Hsieh's work as a tarrying with the erotics of the secret, I do not mean that Tehching Hsieh's secret was his real name, or that he was, quote, an illegal immigrant. The secret instead was that he never stopped representing the desire to reveal the secret. He is a sincere criminal who already puts himself in solitary confinement, an alien who already exposes himself. Without telling you, he'd been trying to tell you all year long. This is a quote. "When I was doing the time clock piece, my dreams were always interrupted." This is obviously not the time clock piece, but the outdoor piece, but I'm fascinated with how many pictures there are of Tehching Hsieh sleeping, especially since he took many of the photographs himself. "When I was doing the time clock piece, my dreams were always interrupted. Nevertheless, they tried to free me. I dreamt that I didn't want to be an artist anymore. Many times my dreams were about my illegality and the immigration authorities trying to catch me or sending me back to Taiwan. And I would try to cross the border to cross the Mexican border to come back again." Among the photographs documenting Tehching Hsieh's year outdoor, there's a profusion of sleepers. When one considers how these photographs were made, this is perhaps all the more remarkable. While some of these pictures were credited to others, an overwhelming percentage of them were taken by the artist himself. Consider this photo of the sleeping bag nestled among the pile of leaves. Is there a body inside? If so, one may assume that the photographer will be someone other than the person hidden inside. But were one to cross-reference documentation, this assumption might be cast in doubt. Well, the setup to shoot the 16mm film of a short passage depicting the same scene is not identical. It is very similar. The camera may be wavering ever so slightly, perhaps because of the slight wind blowing the dried leaves. When the artist emerges from the sleeping bag to walk towards the camera, one may infer that it is he who pans the camera so that we gain a wider view of an arc against which the leaves have gathered, and the artist has slept. In the very next scene, we see the sweeping curve is replicated in an overpass, perhaps one turning into a bridge. It is shot also from a stationary position. The composition for both scenes are very carefully planned. The arc that Hsieh was sleeping against might resemble the total arc, but it was in fact called simply arc. It's also known as St. John's Rotary Arc, a sculpture by Richard Serra, which consisted of 12 feet by 14 feet steel plates that form a 200 feet arc at the St. John's Rotary at the exit from the Holland Tunnel. So this is an article that Richard Serra wrote for Artforum, explaining the work. On the very same day, 4 blocks away from ARC, the same public art agency installed another sculpture by Richard Serra at the entrance to the Franklin Street subway station called TWU. Although TWU would be disassembled on July 30th, 1981, and moved permanently to a new location in Hamburg, Germany, it gained an afterlife that still resonates today. TWU was the site of 2 actions made by David Hammons, who moved to New York from Los Angeles the same year as Tehching Hsieh, 1974, which is also the year I moved to the United States. Several months before Hsieh began the outdoor piece, Hammons invited his friend, the photographer Dawood Bey, to walk with him to the small traffic island where TWU stood. Looking up, Bey saw and made a photograph of what would become known as Shoe Tree, comprised of more than a dozen pairs of shoes tied together by their laces, which Hammons had, over the course of several nights, hurled on top of TWU so that they would be stuck and dangle over the rim of the sculpture. In conversations with Elena Filipovich, Hammons described his intention for semiotically marking this territory because he wanted to give Serra's monument curves. According to Filipovich, Hammons' act of resignification grew out of his, quote, frustrations about seeing this hulking monolith occupy public space. this massive 36-foot tall, 72-ton Corten steel, officially commissioned, expensively produced piece of public art. And it was, in his opinion, an epitome of white American imperialist art. I just want to say that, this is a quotation from what Elena said, and I find it kind of remarkable because I always think of David Hammons as more of a trickster and might not say something so directly, but apparently he did. The story continues. As he was showing Bay the work, Hammons began to urinate onto an interior corner of TWU, while a policeman enters the picture. Bay documents 2 more moments of the encounter. First, we see Hammons rummaging through his bag to look for an ID the policeman demanded for public urination, I suppose, followed by the 2 men in conversation, with Hammons seeming to hold in his hand what appears to be a passport, slightly extending it to the policeman. Pissed Off, titled by Hammons, would be the result of this encounter. Published later in the year, in the second volume of Flu, the magazine published by Franklin Furness. So this was 1981. So what am I doing when I juxtapose 2 artists' bodies in close proximity to 2 public sculptures by Richard Serra, displayed by the same agency a short walk from one another? Am I comparing Hammons' trickster intervention, made with pointed intent, with Hsieh, who intended nothing in his project except never going inside? After all, Tehching Hsieh is shown sleeping in car parks and benches, against buildings, between parked trucks, on concrete platforms, as well as cardboard boxes. And by the time Tehching Hsieh began the outdoor piece, TWU was already disassembled. Am I putting Hammons next to Hsieh and each next to Serra to merely contrast one artist-joker engagement with, quote, an epitome of white American imperialist art, and another's resistance through impassively using a work of art as mere protection from the elements? Perhaps these are simply 2 modes of being with Serra, each a method and each a squatting of sorts. Perhaps. Hermeneutic compulsion goads me further. Illegal America, the exhibition Hsieh is participating in, is taking place at Franklin Furnace, which published Pissed Off. And within a few minutes of showing you his sleeping next to Arc, Hsieh, this time working with a camera operator, is shown walking up to Leo Castelli Gallery on Green Street and looking into what was then probably considered an innermost sanctum of contemporary art. The camera then moves inside the gallery and shows him literally on the outside looking in. So these also, by the way, are the only 2 moments that I could find of the entire outdoor piece where there is Tehching Hsieh's body next to a signifier of contemporary art. So in a year of documentation, these were the only two that I found. The show that Tehching Hsieh is somewhat dramatically looking at is Bruce Naumann's Violins, Violence, Silence. Less than a year before, there was an exhibition of Richard Serra at Castelli called Slice, which took place while Tehching Hsieh was making the time clock piece. Although he must check in every hour on the hour, he was free to be anywhere within a reasonably close vicinity to 111 Hudson Street. Press that had chronicled the time clock piece mentioned that Hsieh frequently used a bicycle. In the spirit of the detailed maps that tracked the scope of his travel during the outdoor piece, according to Google Maps, it takes 19 minutes to walk from Hsieh's loft to 142 Green Street. Was it then plausible or likely that Tehching Hsieh was familiar with the work of Richard Serra and chose Arc as a spot to depict himself in his own piece? So this is, I feel so funny because Tehching Hsieh is sitting right here and we could just ask him, but but I'm giving the talk and I have a hermeneutic compulsion and I'm asking these questions on the inside. Okay. Okay. 2 days after the close of Violins, Violence, Silence, the Castelli Gallery celebrated its 25th anniversary. A photo was taken of the celebrated dealer and his stable. 17 men, 1 woman, all Caucasian. A quick glance made me realize that among them, 5 are artists who've had solo exhibitions at DIA, including Richard Serra. When I saw this image, I knew instantly where it was. In the very late 1980s or the very early 1990s, before I was a guard at DIA, I worked at the Odeon, where this photo was taken. Back then, all the busboys were Chinese, Cantonese in fact, so that we could converse with one another in our native tongue. They took me in as one of their own and told me that they were surprised I was hired as a waiter, because although some of them have been there for many years, they had never seen a Chinese waiter at the Odeon. One day, the manager asked me if I spoke Chinese, and when I said yes, he said, "There's a worker who lacks any English, and he wanted to talk to him." Would I translate for him, the manager asked. He said he would pay me to translate at whatever the fee would be for a 15-minute translation at the UN. He reneged on this, by the way, I never got paid. What the Chinese worker, who was perhaps a decade older than I, and I keep thinking how I was almost exactly the same age, or maybe exactly the same age as Tehching Hsieh was when he came to the US and was working in restaurants. What the Chinese worker, who was perhaps a decade older than I, wanted to ask the manager was whether his wife could take over his job at the restaurant, which was to launder all the tablecloths and napkins for $5 an hour, so that he can take the newly vacated job of cleaning the entire restaurant 7 days a week for $7 an hour. Afterward, the manager, pleased with my performance of this simple task, asked, "Simon, what is your relationship with the Chinese community here in New York?" When I told him not much, I'm an artist and most everyone I knew was from the Whitney program, which I recently finished, he said, "Oh, too bad, because I thought maybe you have a father or an uncle who would like a job here."
I cannot go inside. Listen, you think I'm wasting this? I can stay here. I don't want to go. I don't care. You're gonna have to go inside. Yeah. I don't want to fight. No. I told him I do it. No. You don't want it. You have to go in. No, I want to go. First of all, the judge excused you for today. You don't have to come into court.
Yes, I don't need to.
You don't have to go indoors, no.
Yes.
And for the next time,
Yes.
you don't have to come indoors either. He
Yes.
agreed. He accepted that you're a serious artist and that this is your piece that you're doing.
Yes.
And he understands that you can't come into court
Yes.
consistent with the integrity of your art. I explained to both the judge and to the DA that this was a self-defense because the man who attacked you had a metal pipe or a stick or whatever. He hit you twice and so on. The district attorney is, between now and the next time the case is on, is going to investigate by talking to the complainant, to the man who brought the charge against you, to see whether he admits that he hit you first. If he admits that he hit you first, they're going to dismiss the charges against you. They're going to dismiss your case. If he doesn't admit that to the DA,
Anyone familiar with Tehching Hsieh's outdoor piece knows this is the narrative of the passage. I quote Adrian Heathfield's account. On May 3, 1982, at the corner of Northmore Street and Hudson, something of the past came back to haunt Tehching Hsieh. 2 or 3 months earlier in the year, Hsieh had been accosted by a man with a stick and was forced to defend himself with a nunchaku or nunchucks he carried for protection in his rucksack. Walking in the street on that day in May, he encountered the same man again, who then sought to attract the attention of the police and have Hsieh arrested. Claire Ferguson, a friend of Hsieh's, happened to be filming him, and at that time, happened to be filming him at that time, and the resulting Super 8 film forms a partial but nonetheless revelatory record of the ensuing events and exchanges. Refusing arrest, Hsieh is dragged into a police building by 2 police officers. His forceful protest that he simply cannot go inside, ending in an anguished wail as he is propelled across the threshold of the building. For the first time in Hsieh's performances, an external human force had intervened in the work and broken its rules. Following his arrest, Hsieh was detained for 15 hours and then released into the streets, where he continued his work. He was charged with possession of a criminal weapon and second-degree assault. Following this charge, there were 2 court hearings. However, as we see in the documentary film of Hsieh being briefed outside the first of those hearings by his lawyer Jesse Berman, Hsieh was not detained further. The judge in Hsieh's first hearing, Martin Erdman, had read an article in the Wall Street Journal discussing Hsieh's work, and so was familiar with its principles. Hsieh was not required to enter the court, consistent with the integrity of your art. Quote, as Berman puts it in his filmed post-hearing debriefing with Hsieh. In his court hearing, Hsieh was convicted of the minor crime of disorderly conduct. Heathfield goes on to describe how Hsieh had taken the complexity of his relationship with the law as both an artist who mimes the aesthetics of legal administration and as an undocumented person who would be subject to the brutality of its force should his immigration status be found out. Quote, the law returns to Hsieh in the state of exception he inhabits, outside of the law, yet anchored to it, and seems to at first to assert its proper functions, subjecting Hsieh's body to its authority. But what returns in the final analysis, in the moment of judgment, is a strong iteration of the law of Hsieh's state of exception. Rose McBrien, the judge in Hsieh's second hearing, once again acknowledges Hsieh's project and its principles of laws by not insisting on his presence before the law. Just an aside, I found out in another story that how it worked was that they had walkie-talkies. So Tehching was outside and the lawyer was inside. Okay. The judges stick to their words, allowing Hsieh's body to slip out of one's subjection and into his self-chosen one. It seems the rule of the individual artist overrules. In this little test case between performance and the law is shown as a system whose own performance articulations generate and depend upon states of exception. Now, I quote this passage at length because I admire Heathfield's close attention to the nuance of the performativity of law. But I think something is missing when we assume what the judge has been, when we assume the judge's benevolence is based on, quote, Hsieh's state of exception, that they are simply acknowledging an artist's unique self-governing principle of never entering the building as a, quote, self-chosen subjection, which the two judges simply affirm. More than one other source relating this moment, by quoting Kathleen Hughes, the same Wall Street Journal reporter whose article Judge Erdman had read. When she quoted later the rationale behind the judge's decision to let Hsieh stay outside, this is not that article, this is the one that he read. Quote, the judge says, I didn't see any reason to bring him indoors. These days, anything is art. Staying outside may be art. He then says, I'm getting old, I don't know what's going on anymore. So to portray this as the kind of liberal ruling of a sympathetic jurist, when we know that McBrien had followed Erdman's lead, is not incorrect, but there appears to me a sleight of hand that skips a step. This is not only a case of the institution of law in the year 1982 suspending usual protocols because it is able to recognize the institution of art. Nor is it simply law giving art a pass based solely on the self-governance of an individual artist's criteria. there is a third party in the picture. The institution of law is able to recognize the institution of art because it saw it through the institution of the press. There are 3 institutions, not 2. In allowing Tehching Hsieh to stay outside, Erdmann is saying, I don't know what the rules of art are, but I know that the Fourth Estate, in the interest of society, had reported on an artist and had deemed him worthy of serious attention. His judgment is based not on the individuality of the artist and their right to, quote, self-expression, but on his not knowing art. He does not know art, but relying on the press to educate him, to tell him something about the importance of maintaining the relative autonomy of a field, art, which society has sanctioned to address the trouble with what is normative. So basically, I'm saying the relative autonomy of art is something that is developed out of history, and this is something that is in dialogue with what we think of as art or the press or common sense. It is not because an individual or his lawyer walked into the judge's chambers and said, the accused cannot go or remain inside. It is because the institution of the press had validated the import of Hsieh's work so that a judge could co-sign onto this proposition. In exercising his consideration for the press, Erdmann allowed Hsieh to complete his work. When we look back at 1982 and say Hsieh's work would be impossible now, we are not only identifying a moment more sympathetic to unknowing and mutual recognition, we are looking at the ruins of institutions. Now, this is kind of a coda before the coda. But I just want to say, in closing this section of the reading, I want to look briefly at the actual article the judge had read. The illustration, first of all, is kind of amazing. Okay. The author noted, among other things, the rigor of Tehching Hsieh's work, described pretty closely his criteria. And there are 4 proper names that she spoke with to write. I'm sorry, there are 4 proper names with whom she spoke to write this story. Tehching Hsieh himself, and people described to have gathered at the public stamping. I'm sorry, people who have described to have gathered at the final public stamping of the time clock piece. The first is John Susskind, who is described as a psychology research assistant at Bellevue. But we also know that he is, for those of us who read a lot about Tehching Hsieh, he's somebody who has written on Tehching Hsieh at least 2 articles in High Performance. And Tehching, I don't know if it's true, but I suspect he is also depicted in the arrest. Am I correct? Is he the guy who is at the, when you were arrested, was he standing there? Yeah. I gathered that would be him because he also took some of the photos. Am I correct? According to Dia, there were 2 photographs of the outdoor photographs that were credited to him, but maybe that's not correct. In which case, Liv, we have to correct that.
That's possible to clear box.
Okay.
Yeah, I cannot Because I mean that time I'm not so, dear with police. I don't pay attention for this.
Okay, yeah. We'll sort it out later.
Before you say about is 16 movie camera, it's not.
It's 8 millimeter.
It's a
Super 8. Okay, yeah. Yeah. So thank you for the correction. I will duly noted. Okay. So in any case, he is somebody who is a friend of Tehching Hsieh's. I believe he passed away. Am I correct? I don't.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think.
I'm surprised you get a lot of information more than me.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this for decades.
This one, how you can get this one?
Yeah.
Tell me how to make you get the image.
I found it. I did some research, and I also found the Village Voice article that I read as a teenager. Anyway, by Kay Larson. In any case, anyway, so that's one person. The second person is Lydia Marushko, described as an economist, but through a Google search, I discovered that she's somebody who writes about immigration and writes about immigration reform, at least one academic article. Now, the third person, but it is not clear in the way that this is written, if he attended the closing ceremony of the time clock piece. It would be awesome if he did. Is Leo Castelli, who says, okay, I'm just going to quote. Leo Castelli, a New York art gallery owner, who said he respects Mr. Hsieh, who is obviously very serious about what he's doing and very committed. But Mr. Castelli isn't sure that Mr. Hsieh's performance can be considered avant-garde. Performance art expressing ideas by using the body rather than by creating an object became a legitimate art form in New York in the 1960s, he says, as exemplified by such people as Chris Burden, who had himself shot in the arm. This is a little bit close to me because I wrote my 9th grade paper on Chris Burden. And then I went to UCLA where he was teaching. So that's the end of the written part, but I want to engage in a conversation with you on 2 codas. The first is something that I think it's actually very, very important in our age. And that is, in looking at all of Tehching Hsieh's work, I found no moments of self-orientalizing at all. Now, you can speculate why that is. Tehching's mentioned his influences as Kafka, Dostoevsky, Van Gogh, Nietzsche, existentialism. So, I mean, I didn't quite know this until I started reading, but I realized, oh, this is what we have in common, But I think it's really, really interesting that Tehching Hsieh is so important to us. And by us, I mean we who are Asian Americans or of Asian extraction or living as immigrants or people in Asia. And at the same time, he is somebody who reads voraciously in Chinese, but he is not part of the identitarian discourse at all. I asked Liv a question that I found really, really interesting. And I mean, in a way, I feel like I know the answer already. And that is, what happened to the nunchucks? Because in a way, it's like, okay, these are illegal objects, so they were confiscated, so I know that. But I'm really interested in how Tehching Hsieh is never pictured with them, because that would have been one moment when a fetishism of Asia in the 70s would have erupted before us. And I find it really, really interesting that we have pictures of the practice of martial arts, but except for the first image, except for this one, by Linda Montano and not Tehching Hsieh. So I'm going chronologically. This is October 25th, 1983, December 16, 83. There seems to be some kind of comedy going on here, I don't know. And she strikes interesting poses while he's doing dishes. Or he is doing nothing. So this is one coda that I hope we can maybe touch upon. The second coda comes from how Linda Montano described Tehching as a master, and how Marina Abramovich describes Tehching as a master. I found that so odd. I mean, not that you're not a master, Tehching, but maybe it's because I'm from Hong Kong and I grew up with another meaning of the word master. So when we first immigrated to the US, I remember receiving a letter from my grandmother addressed to Master Simon Leung, because master is the term you use for young boys rather than Mr. So to me, in my mind, there's always this flip-flop in terms of what is a master and who is a master. And of course, in keeping with the Nietzschean side of Tehching Hsieh, I think of the transvaluation of mastery. So I began to notice something. This is, once again, from the rope piece. And I'm just going to show you sort of the same scene over and over again. It is where Tehching's desk is against the wall and where Linda Montano's desk is. And when they, according to the readings I read, when they're working together, they turn their backs on one another so that they could have, some degree of autonomy and privacy. So I found 3 photographs that really interest me. So you must be asking, what's so interesting about these 3 photographs? It's all in the details. When Tehching Hsieh is facing away from Linda Montano, he's facing Franz Kafka. I'm going to read just a little bit from Before the Law, which is a very short story that Kafka wrote that was published twice in his lifetime. It's also included in the process, the trial, as a sort of parable. I'm just gonna, I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but I'm just gonna read the beginning and I'm gonna read the end. Before the, okay. Old people need different glasses. Okay. All right. Before the law stands a doorkeeper. To this doorkeeper, there comes a man from the country who begs for admittance to the law. But the doorkeeper says that he cannot admit the man at the moment. The man, on reflection, asks if he will be allowed then to enter later. It is possible, answered the doorkeeper, but not at this moment. Since the door leading into the law stands open as usual, and the doorkeeper steps to one side, the man bends down to peer through the entrance. What the doorkeeper sees, that he laughs, and when the doorkeeper sees that, he laughs and says, "You are so strongly tempted. Try to get in without any permission. But note that I am powerful, and I'm only the lowest doorkeeper. From hall to hall, keepers stand at every door, one more powerful than the other." So skip, skip, jump, jump. He waits for years. Until he's quite weak and old. Now his life is drawing to a close. Before he dies, all that he has experienced during the whole time of his sojourn condenses in his mind into one question, which he has never yet put to the doorkeeper. He beckons the doorkeeper, since he can no longer raise his stiffening body. The doorkeeper has to bend far down to hear him, for the difference in size between them has increased very much to the man's disadvantage. "What do you want to know now?" asked the doorkeeper. "You are insatiable. Everyone strives to attain the law," answers the man. How does it come about then that in all these years no one has come seeking admittance but me? The doorkeeper perceives that the man is nearing his end and his hearing is failing, so he bellows in his ear, "No one but you would gain admittance through this door, since this door was intended for you. Only you. I am now going to shut it." In 27 years of collaboration, I worked with Warren Iswachowski, a friend who passed away in 2019. We talked a lot about Kafka, and we have a quote. That we used in our work. It is the very last of his aphorisms. "There is no need for you to leave the house. Stay at your table and listen. Don't even listen, just wait. Don't even wait. Be completely quiet and alone. The world will offer itself to you to be unmasked. It cannot do otherwise. It will writhe before you in ecstasy." this is the only work of mine that I'm showing. Thanks very much.
This also feels very strange to ask you a question about an artist's work. So I was wondering, with so much of durational performance, the possibility for failure starts to build, right? There's a sort of a potential for failure in work, which I think is really interesting. And I'm wondering if you, what your thoughts are on failure in Tehching's work, about the existence of it, the sort of tenuous nature of it.
What I feel about possible failure in his work? Well, I think Tehching has actually talked about it in the year without art piece, and also in the 13-year piece. I mean, it's very, very Tehching. I feel so weird that I'm talking about you and you're sitting right here. But anyway, from what I know, for the 13-year piece, he tried to disappear, and he wanted to go to Alaska, but he made it as far as Seattle. And he felt like it was 1974 all over again, because he could make so little money. It was really hard to disappear. Am I right, Tehching? I don't know.
I have language problem. Even I live here 50 years. In October 4, I say when I live in the outdoor, a piece beginning friend told me, say, why you not learn English?
Yes.
And then I said, I don't want that. And then he asked me, what do you do? I said, I just want wasting time.
Yes.
And that's I answered, but it was honest, I told you.
Yeah.
So you talk so great about reduce my work, better than I do.
No.
You know, because you see today you talk my work, but you, my friend, sit here to train a little bit.
Yes.
Your voice so low I cannot. Yeah. Actually, I told you. You talk today, I have 40%. I don't understand. It's not.
I don't know if I understand.
No. The understand means my English, I have 40%, I don't get it.
Yes.
It's not about the concept, I don't understand.
Yeah.
It's about my language.
Yes.
I only receive 60%.
Yes.
Sorry.
But I'm going to give you 100% of what you say right here, okay? I love that idea of, Tehching's friend asking him, why don't you use that year to learn English? And he says, no, I want to waste time, okay? So I don't want to learn it. I want to waste time. So this is another quote. When I say something, I am also saying the opposite. This is 100% Tehching Hsieh translated, but it's 100% him, not me. So when I say my work is not autobiographical, I am also saying that I put the hard part of my existence into it, even if it stays underground. It is still part of the work. When I say I am working or I am not working, you have to think both ways to make it complete. You can say I'm wasting time or that I'm working very hard. So I feel that I feel that very, very strongly in your work, that it cleaves so closely to a radical immanence, not transcendence, but immanence.
Working time is only good for put in art time.
Yeah.
And then for art time, I'm 24 hours for working time.
That's right. Yeah.
And only that situation I make sense for people. I waste my time and dedicate for the art piece. Another way, you just put in normal life, wasting time become too yeah, it's negative for
Right.
people talking about.
Yeah, you have to actively waste time in your work.
Yeah, like in another opposite way to explain how much I'm working hard for doing this, and also my work is do nothing, So it's not produce something for people saying this is like say you I punch Tom Cook. If this is like to give people say, oh, this kind is so difficult to do it, but I tell you, if you have asked somebody to do this and pay them $1 million, of course, many people wait in line were not difficult. But it's difficult because it's wasting time and you don't get enough, you don't get some result, and then people don't want to. It's not my work, it's difficult, it's put most important. It's about wasting time, nobody wants to do it. But the reason I can do it because for art, that purpose, I don't wasting time.
Yeah.
I working hard and I make it.
You find a form for the art.
Right.
Yeah.
My concept become only stay in that situation, I make sense for people.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you, Tehching, and thank you all for coming.